Hey there, sinner. It's Adam and Jacques, and welcome back to the Cult of You. So yes, I'm back. And if you are not familiar with the show, if you haven't been following it, so you don't know about my little bit of a break, feel free to skip. You'll get information down below on the chapter index. But if you've been here before, I want to take a moment just to acknowledge the elephant in the room being myself and the return of the Cult of You. So now that everyone else has skipped ahead, I'm talking to you personally who's watched the show, who's followed my journey and followed the content and the material on this channel. And firstly, I want to thank you for having that open mind and for looking at these ideas. When I left the Cult of You, I did so because I figured all of the important things I needed to say were said. And I honestly had no interest in competing with or even raising my voice in opposition to what was going on in society at the time. I figured, why? I could very easily go and enjoy the wonderful life I've manifested for myself. I felt no need to further teach. But as time went on, I started developing what I've come to title the Book of Abraxas, which was a system of awakening that I discovered while working directly with that force. This was not just in specific channeling sessions with that, but it was a complete rediscovery of my own journey and the various components of myself at a whole new level. But it was inside of this that I came face to face with something within myself that I knew needed to be addressed. You see, the truth is, I've always been hesitant to teach occultism. And the first reason I started teaching it was simply, as I mentioned many times on the show, was because I heard very directly from other practitioners about the damage that was being done by people that were claiming a number of these ideas and concepts of the occult that weren't actually initiated, that weren't truly trained in these materials, and fabricating ideas driven by immature moral and emotional drives. Now, that was my first intention, was to clarify these things. And I figured the messages that I delivered was enough. The true seeker would find them. I wrote a book. I figured the true seeker would find that as well. But the further spirit worked with me, it eventually came to me and said that I'm being selfish. That just because I've realized some truth or some insight doesn't mean I have the right to keep it to myself. And also, I need to recognize the fact that if I don't use magic or use the spell, so to speak, to share this wisdom and insight with others, indirectly I permit other people that have worse intentions to do so. The truth is, I, for a period of time, thought I would save people. It was a weird martyr thing, to be honest with you. I figured the challenges that you go through in occultism is quite difficult in true initiation, and most people don't make it. Most people make these claims, and they're all big and fancy on the front end, with all their praises to the gods and all their little ego bad outfits. But when truth comes to initiation, their ability to give up who they are and their excuses is very rare, so to speak. So I became disenchanted, as many other magicians do that are in the path where they're teaching or training others. And I figured I'd rather walk away, but the truth is I can't. The truth is that there are far darker and more twisted monsters out there than anything that you will face in the transformative changes, and that the transformative changes that this work does bring when done correctly is far more important, and I think at this point in time very necessary. And this is where we cut back into everyone else that skipped forward. So I've returned on this platform in order to make sure that I clarify the misconceptions around occultism, and I make these principles practical so you can see them in correlation to new science. This is, in fact, the trends that most things are going towards. If you have at all looked at the world, or if you have at all looked at the development of various therapies and sciences and technologies, and all the existential activities around AI and everything else, the occult principles and practices from the ancient traditions hold a lot of the answers and the insights of what's going on and what we need to do in order to transform these things within ourselves and be better prepared for what is ahead of us. Now, I don't want to at any point have you have the impression that I'm in any way better than you. I am not. In fact, you're probably better than I am in many other areas of life. I'm just a human being like you. I have had the great privilege of spending my life traveling the world and being initiated into a variety of different occult and mystical orders, everything from becoming a master Freemason, practicing as a Rosicrucianary, working in the Gold Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, being initiated and practicing in the Dracon and the Dragon Rouge, and a number of other occult traditions for over 30 years now. And within those years, I have not only focused on my initiations and my progression in those areas, but I've also focused on mastery in the various technological spheres of the mind and of technology of itself. In fact, there's virtually very little programming languages or technologies that I do not only understand well, but I run in my other company, Synapsis, where I build incredible technology products for my clients. But that is the balance that I struck in my pursuit for understanding business, for understanding marketing, and for understanding human psychology. So I want you to understand that the ideas and the concepts that I share with you here are not purely things that you will find from initiation to any one of those occult traditions or orders, but instead, they are the result of my research in these various different fields. And they are concepts that if you yourself are a occultist, I'm pretty confident that you would resonate with. And if you are someone that's at the edge of business or the edge of psychology and you're looking for that next level, I'm confident that these ideas that I'll be sharing here and that you'll find throughout this channel and in my book, The Cult of Two, or in my teachings, The Cult of You, in the website, will complement that, will show you that missing link between science and the soul and the technology of magic. Now, I want to begin with a little bit of a paradigm. And this was part of the paradigm that brought me back into this work and realized I had to stop being selfish and I had to start presenting these ideas in a clearer, more concise way for yourself and everyone else to be able to utilize. So it's not just good philosophy. But before I go into those, and that's really what a lot of my new content is going to be about, I want you to join me on a paradigm. Some time ago, I interviewed on this channel Dr. Johann Kaleman, and him and I spoke about the Aztec temples and the Mayan calendars, and we spoke about the different types of calendars and all these end of the world prophecies. Now, a lot of people get these ideas wrong. They think there's one Mayan calendar, and the fact is there's hundreds of Mayan calendars. They're more like cosmological maps tracking cycles of planets and loops of the universe, so to speak. According to this system, and what him and I speak about at that point, is that the final, the ninth calendar, so to speak, came into conclusion a few years back. Now, the philosophy here inside of that Mayan based tradition is that with the advent of each of the calendar sequences, there's almost a vibration or a frequency or a note that's being released and then becomes material or becomes creation. And with every one of these ages, another note, so to speak, comes in. This creates an interference, and this builds up a model of reality. Dr. Kaleman speaks about how some of these frequencies also is part of the reason why people experience colors when utilizing psychedelics or when entering synesthesia, and many of the psychic shifts. If you're familiar with Joe Dispenza, you'll even see his work with the kaleidoscope as a way, and he even says there's always this change of color, and the belief is that the mind of human beings is very much formulated or contained by structure of vibration and sound. And there's a lot of technology, and there's many others that I interview on the technology of sound on the show as well. So I do recommend you explore it if you're new to the channel. But one of the things that this kind of brings about, this overarching philosophy, is that we reach the edges of the extreme of this fold into duality. In other words, duality, the Descartes split, the split between science and soul, was not an accidental mishap or misalignment in the plan of God. It was intentional. We needed to separate soul and science so intensely. We needed to become so clinical about models of reality so that we could give birth to the medicines, to artificial intelligence, to the technology that is currently available on our planet. Because if we were overwhelmed with the emotional and artistic meaning of it, we would be overblown by God and never able to look at the most molecular structures of the universe with such detached observance, which was required. But reaching that edge of the eighth vibratory plane brought us into the ninth, or the final calendar. And the purpose of the final calendar, now that we've reached the extremes of duality, was the reversal back into unity. In other words, the soul separated and separated into materialism in order to develop the technology, or essentially turn materialism into gold, turn the world into something that we can evolve to the next plane, and then start making its merger back into the union. And that's what we're seeing in the world today. There are many monsters, and we are all, let's be honest, awakened at the ridiculousness of various people that we used to place in power over us, whether that was in the church or whether that was in politics, and the illusion of these people's greatness is being fallen apart. We're seeing that the quote unquote evil, occult, satanic cult movements is not in some occult initiatory order. That just is literally the people that were not initiated into the club, that through their money and their boredom created strange, twisted, pedophilic rings that had nothing to do with the nature of occult teaching and had everything to do with a completely disconnected soul. And now what we see in the world is we see the extremes of this duality, of the left and the right, of the internal and the external, of the religious and the scientific. These are the final pillars of the old war that is now busy collapsing and crumbling in as we move towards a greater state of unity. Now, part of this is a type of apocalypse, if you will, and there are many other segments of other teachers that talk about this in different contexts, and it's not the quote unquote biblical end of the world in any sense, but it is the end of a certain genetic line. You see, historically, if we look throughout humanity, there's always been a specific sequence in our evolutionary train that's been known by sex magicians and occultists the world over. We first have a shift in sexual identity or in sexual politics, and that is the serpent rising, the kundalini, the dragon. It's a shift at this fundamental level of the frequencies. This then leads to a change in the arts. And again, the arts is magic. The arts is the representation of these components of the soul. And once that happens, that's when there's a change in the political and economic status of the culture. And we've seen that in the past as early as the hippie period. And if you're familiar with magic or you've read books like Demons of the Flesh with the Shreks, you will see that this text also highlights that even the great Babylon ritual that was performed by one of the OTO's classics, and I'm not talking about Crowley, will indicate the creation of a great sexual, erotic, magical movement that stimulated the hippie movement, or the awakening of that sexuality, that stimulated a change in the arts and the culture, and then stimulated the change in the political times. And we've seen the same thing just now. We've seen the shift in sexuality due to the misrepresentation or the changes in the shifting into the concept of gender pronouns and sexual identity. All right, whether you are pro or against this, it's not the purpose of our conversation. We're just looking at the data, and that is that there has been another transformation in the sexual current of humanity. This has led to a change in the arts, and this is not necessarily the most positive one, but let's be honest, the way we produce art has changed with the advent of AI. We are no longer creating the art. Not that necessarily that's a good thing, but that is just another piece of this data of a shift in it. And the shifts in the politics is something that we can see right now. There is a definitive change in how we are perceiving power, how we are perceiving sexuality. In fact, if we look at a world today where deep fakes are on the rise and sexuality is being abused or flooded with fake OnlyFans or fake models and fake relationships and supposed billionaires building robotics completely disconnected from the biological fact of how humans work because they've lived in their ivory towers for way too long that they don't know how humanity operates anymore and think that they are the gods. The fact remains that the shifts have occurred and we're seeing the shift happening in our society. Loneliness epidemics are on the increase. Men and women of the current youthful ages are not dating or breeding as much as they used to, especially not at my time. Our dynamic and interest in sexuality has definitely changed in this period. And this is indirectly the shift of that all biological pattern changing. Now, for many, this may be a call for doom. This may be a paranoid skit. This may be a fear of what's going on in reality. Their their attempt to look towards the past, but the past shows references and knowledge of the change, but it's in the present that we need to create the shift. So, what is that shift? And that's why I'm here, and this is why I'm back, is to help offer paradigms and models to prepare everyone else for what is coming. And it's also to give you more resources. And that's simply because I get to see these from a different perspective due to my spiritual experiences and the knowledge that I've acquired through my time in those different traditions. And it is simply this, that as you look at politics and as you look at the news and AI and as you look at all of these things, to not forget that what you may come to perceive as the direction the world is going in is not the direction the world is going in, but it is simply the direction that the people that are currently in power and in influence and media that have taken the most time in that area are using their propaganda machines, which is their form of spells, in order to enchant people into a certain version of reality, because the fact remains the same. When you are in fear, when you are feeling powerless, what happens is you lose your power to create change. You literally establish a cognitive bias, a cognitive dissonance between yourself and the others. In fact, there's some interesting research in this field where they would take games like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where you have the person on the one side answering these random questions, and you have the other guy on the side with the cue cards. Now, logically, when you and I look at that, we know that logically the guy with the cue cards is not the smart one. He's literally just the guy sitting there, acting calm and relaxed, reading cue cards and playing to the role to challenge the guest. He has no actual knowledge of trivia. He has no knowledge of the world or the map necessarily. He's literally just reading the answers and the questions. The other person on the other side, though, is the one that's prepared. So theoretically, we could at least assume that the person on the other side that came onto the show to challenge his own trivia is the most educated between these two on these different matters. But the interesting thing is that when you interview the audience actually believes the person asking the questions is the one with the greater knowledge. And it gets even funnier because when we ask the person being interviewed that actually has all the knowledge, even he in most cases would assume the other person has all the answers, is in charge, has the control. This is not true. But the moment we are in this cognitive dissonance, when we are starting to perceive that other people have the answers, that other people's stuff is figured out and you don't know what you're doing, or you can't get it right, or you're not in control, and what you're doing is you're giving up your sense of agency, and as such, you're giving up your occult or your magical power to produce your own reality, and you're handing it to other people. And that's why they have power. If instead you stop buying into that version of reality, and I'm not saying be blind to it, it's definitely a possibility of reality, but there are infinite possibilities of reality that you can participate in, that you can manifest in, including making the possibility of victory against these dark and unwanted people and forces a greater possibility than the possibility of their success. When we are more aligned to the probability of victory than we are are to the probability of failure, then we open ourselves up to that. Now, that being said, I'm not a preacher in the school of positive thinking. I'm not telling you to ignore the data. I'm asking you to read the data objectively. So instead of just going, there's no weeds in the garden, like Tony Robbins says, pull the weeds out, but also focus on the fact that you've got the resources to create change, that the divine that you seek, that the knowledge that you seek, that God itself is within you, and that higher being within you has the answers you're looking for, and you have the resources and the wealth and the abilities you need within yourself now. And stop letting other people dictate a paradigm of fear that you're not going to have it, that you don't know what you're doing, that you're losing it, and then also subjecting yourself to tool sets like social media, like too much AI use, which has been proven to weaken your cognitive function. In other words, to make you more suggestible for these paradigms and these narratives. So it is very important that you become conscious creator of reality. And to be a conscious creator of reality means you stop being a consumer purely, you more curate the information that you take in, and you start being a creator. Because unless you start putting out better messages, messages of possibility, messages of hope, unless you start actually creating the world that in your heart is the world that you should be living in, because that's your unique spiritual destiny, you don't get to inspire other people. You don't get to put new narratives in the world. And those destructive narratives win. And let's be honest, we've all seen the Epstein files. We all know how sick so many people are that are in power, that are billionaires. And I'm not here to say that the billionaire thing is wrong or power is wrong, but I am saying when you deny yourself the right to grow more, to have more wealth, to have more success, to have more influence, you're not being humble. You're saying, okay, us good people shouldn't have that. Those dark, twisted ones, they should. You support the narratives of money is evil, and you support the narrative of only the rich and only the dark and only the bad, and as a result, we live in that world. And we are now, as we see from the changes in the calendars, at the final point where those worlds are starting to crack. They're being revealed because this is their end. This is the ending of that period of time as we move to the unity. And moving to the unity, I call and refer to the concept of the idea of Abraxas. And Abraxas is associated or defined as the God beyond God. And the reason I adapt to that paradigm is because the way I perceive God is very much in line with Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, and also under this concept, even though it's Ramphas speaks of the hidden God. In other words, in plain, simple English, to me, God is the personal God of the individual, or the God of the body, the God of the unconscious mind, the part of you that creates your reality. And each and every one of us, by that definition, as Psalm 82, it says, "Ye are all gods, and ye are the children of the Most High." So my definition of God is that we are all a God. We all have that potential, and you do. You are unconsciously creating your reality. Learning magic is not learning some strange, blasphemous thing. It's just literally becoming aware of how you're already doing that and building a relationship with the God within you that does that. And then to me, Abraxas in that sense is the container within all gods, that all gods dwell within the essence, the ground. So, whether our intentions or interpretations or our language is different, that's the essence. So I believe in the middle way. I don't believe in the left or the right hand path anymore. I believe in the middle way. I think both are necessary in the earlier stages of our development. The same ways we need to go through that scientific approach and the spiritual approach to get to a space where we can unite them. And that's the period we are in. We are in the period of the middle way. And we are in the period where we realize that we can't say the left is right, the right is wrong, or any of that stuff, or that women or men, or any of these dualities, because they're all out of date. We are in the period of time of unity. We are in the period of time where we say, okay, parts, what are the results when both of you are able to unite? What is the actual need you're both trying to meet? And what does that look like? What is a healthier, more functional vehicle for both? Now, I'm not saying that's going to be obvious. especially not when you buy into narratives of limitation and narratives of separation and narratives of duality. Because what the mind is focused on is what it can perceive. And here's the facts. Your cerebral calculates 400 billion bits of information, yet your conscious mind can only process 2,000. In other words, what you currently think is reality is nothing more than one of the ingredients thrown on top of that double pizza, and I do mean like 2, 3 pizzas even. It's literally minute in comparison to the infinite possibilities that there are. Your intention, your feeling of the world can be greater. That's picking up your nervous system. That's listening to your body. That's listening to the deeper intelligence within you that says, hey, it's not actually as limited and bad. You're not actually as powerless. You actually can do something. You just have to shift your attention from disempowerment to empowerment. From there's no way and we're doomed and it's dark to there is a way. It's because we allow these things, and we see this in the global stage now, where so many political leaders have simply shown that they are not leaders, but they are merely reacting on the stress response of their nervous system, and they are fawning or freezing or flighting or flighting. So this is a demonstration not of spiritually mature people. Not saying that all politicians aren't spiritually mature. Some of them are really standing up, making a difference, and being authentic. But many of them we see doing these things, and instead of judging them, let's look at it critically or spiritually and realize that they're under stress responses because they don't have the mechanisms within themselves, because they themselves have been sold a narrative of limitation, a narrative of duality. And unless we start speaking differently to ourselves and opening new narratives of new possibilities of who we are and what we're capable of in order to make the transition into this new age, this new alchemy, this new transformation, that message cannot echo through time and space. And that is why we are here. So with that being said, I want to leave you with some practical ideas. Everyone's out there on the internet trying to automate their content creation with AI, which is soulless and junk. Or they're out there trying to follow a trend which doesn't work, because by the time you get to the trend, it's failed, or it's people are used to it. Stop looking to other people and start opening your own book of shadows, your own grimoire. Every single magician, and this is probably the greatest technology that magic has, is the gnosis of the book of secrets, the book of shadows. It is what you and I and each of us holds. And this is the grammar of the neurons and the models of reality inside of our head that's been organized in beautiful spells. In other words, spelling, in other words, these letters, these representations, these gods, these archetypes, which are higher forms of language inside of the psyche, soul, which is the Greek word for psyche, or Greek psyche being the Greek word for soul, is the mechanism or the technology of the human spirit. And this technology on its own, people have tried to abstract in ways such as NLP and hypnosis and marketing and copyright, and it's still very fluffy at that level. It's not very working. It's not very effective. It's actually very manipulative, and people can feel that. They can experience that, because at that level, it may still be absent of the 3 other treasures, which is the heart and the sexual current. And I'm not saying everything should be spoken of in arousal, but when I speak of the sexual current, I mean it's in touch with your darkest truth, the parts of yourself in developmental stages as a child, when your sexuality became activated, that you may have linked shame to and repressed within yourself, and that became shadow. So when you don't purify those, they become the corruption that we see in the world today. But if you own those shadows and you merge with them, you unlock incredible Kundalini power for your manifestations. And you also can only do so by releasing the shame. So firstly, that entire idea of the evil black magician, that has all the power of the occult, it's completely incorrect. You literally cannot ascend up the spiritual progression stages in full awakening without actually resolving your shame, healing your trauma, doing these things. Because until you do, you are repressing incredible energy. Your heart has so much more power. And we know the research from the Heart Math Institute about this. In order to create magnetic fields around you, it even senses information up to 6 seconds faster than the brain does. These are far more powerful systems. And you can't just manipulate your own heart. You're going to shut it off. You're going to go offline. You're going to develop heart wounds and heart blocks. So you literally have to be a healthy person, a spiritual person, in order to grow these things. And this is why this is not the age of repression and games and manipulation. This is the age in which we start awakening to our true power and true potential. Now, you're not going to be able to do that by just following AI trends and stuff like that. You're going to be able to do that by going into an artistic and alchemical dance with your shadow, with your heart, with your truth, with your vision, with your purpose in life. And when you start writing content out of that, when you start building businesses out of that, when you start defining relationships and friendships from the exploration of those things, now you're looking to the soul for the map and not to some AI or other influencer that may or may not even be real. For you have no idea if they even have that many followers, right? We've seen massive bot networks. You've seen some of the ridiculous things in the comment sections and areas. You don't even know if any of that stuff is real. We are at no better a time to understand the old idea of Maya, as we live in Maya. We live in a time or a world of illusion by which our senses are manipulated. And I'm not saying that you can't trust everything, and by all means, don't be that paranoid. But I am saying that the source, the authority of your life must be your own spirit, and that you need to prioritize sacred space, and you need to prioritize meditation, and you need to prioritize interpreting your dreams and having a conversation realistically with the God within you. And I honestly don't care. Let me be straight here. I don't care if you're a Christian. I don't care if you're a Muslim. I don't care if you're an occultist, if you're a Satanist, if you're a draconian witch, if you're practicing witchcraft, Nordic tradition, any of this. I care that you're a good person. And if anybody comes to that paradigm of satanic this and that's why it's evil, that is just an illiterate person. And forgive my language, but it's true, because they're simply not educated enough. And they're just using simple generalizations because of their lack of actual education on what these subjects actually mean in initiatory traditions. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that having that label is not necessarily everyone's good. There's an incredibly large amount of people that never actually made it into the club or got a little bit of knowledge and they went and destroyed themselves. But let's be honest, there's as many Christian groups and Muslim groups and Hindu groups and Taoist groups and magical groups that do that. It's not the tradition, it's the fucking human being. Okay? There's no, and take me at my word for that. I've been initiated into many dark traditions. I've worked my way through the Cvlt tree. I've worked with every form of Goethic spirit and other entity that you can imagine. And I'll tell you this straight. There is no literal devil that's running the scene. Okay? That's the delusion of deluded minds that want to give up agency because they're disempowered in themselves and they fall into these unhealthy narratives. The only devil is inside of the mind of man. And by all fairness, the mind of man is a pretty unique thing. It's also what contains the unconscious, the collective unconscious, which is the plane the archetypes dwell in. It is where we get access to other dimensions of ourselves. But we're the doorway. We're the gateway. You can shut that down. You can change that stuff. You are the one that has agency. Stop giving it away to politicians. Stop giving it away to the media. Stop giving it away to religion. Stop giving it away to your fears. Stop giving it away to your judgments. Stop giving it away to the voices of the past that says you're not attractive, you're not interesting, you can't control the fat, you can't get and do the exercise, you can't. That is a lie. And this is what I like about the dark path, because even in that, when they says the devil is the lord of lies, to the uninitiated, that sounds like the devil's going to trick you. But any initiate that understands the language knows that it just means that the dark part of your soul, that's your own shame, that's repressed there, that's actually, if you ask anybody in therapy, is the reason why they keep creating the same stuff. In other words, it's literally the prince of your world must become the lord of lies. In other words, he's the master of the illusion. So stop lying to yourself, recognize the illusion that's being placed upon your eye, and start realizing that what you see is not reality. What you see is the projection of the narrative in your heart. And that narrative has been tainted by people, places, times, things, and events. And that pain is being forced by other people that want to be in power. But here's the truth. They are not as powerful as you, because within you is the one God that creates your reality. And if you allow that part to come forward and to build a relationship with it, it can create a beautiful tomorrow for all of us. But that requires you to show up. That requires you to be authentic with all your parts. And I'm going to be authentic with you in this journey going forward. I'm going to be extremely vulnerable. I'm going to share things I've never shared. And I'm going to go on a journey that I've never gone on before with anybody. Adam Knox has been a component of myself that speaks the esoteric and spiritual and occult part of my life. And then there is Jacques Graven that speaks my technology and business side. And they're both very, very senior in what they do, because I'm not a young man anymore. I'm just a good looking one. And in the next couple of months, I'm going to invite you to join my other channel where you're going to see, myself teaching technology as Jacques Graven and teaching business in that area. And he's going to run into a client called Adam Knox. And they're going to change each other's world as I bring those two together. So if you're interested in learning about business and you're interested in technology and you're interested in watching how I build the next chapter of my life, which is the release of the book of Abraxas and the incredible ideas and technology that I'm going to put in there to really enrich this narrative of you are God and you create reality, and we are all part of that God, and every single man, woman, and child is a star, and that we do not need to empower darkness that separates us, but instead live in a world that is better. Technology and social media has not brought us closer together. So because of that, I'm also inviting you. I'm going to start hosting a open circle on the second Sunday of every month at 9 p.m. South African time. It's free. If you don't want to show your face, if you're shy, you don't have to worry about that. It's going to be on Zoom. You can, shut down the camera as long as you're participating in the conversation and the ideas. It's an hour long where we practice spiritual fundamentals in the classic old spiritualist tradition, where we open ourselves to our psychic development into the parts within ourselves. And you're guided by myself and some other teachers and friends in this little community that can start growing. So if you're interested, you'll find information beneath this video where you can apply to join it, because that's the only requirement that I have, that you register, because I want to keep these things at least leveraged enough and controlled enough on when they happen and how many people attend them, so it's easier to manage energetically. But I want you to know that that's there. So if you're looking to participate in the community, that's a slow, easy entrance into it. If you're exploring and discovering my work in the occult right now, I want you to keep that in mind, that the occult paradigms is the foundational paradigms in which I teach, right? It's also not the only paradigms in which I teach. So I look at these ideas and how they relate to business, sexuality, relationship, technology, everything. And that's why I'm going to be, over the next 6 to 9 months, bringing these parts together. So I'm still going to separate the channels. In other words, spirituality, interviews with other spiritual teachers and authors, the discussions on philosophy, spirituality, personal growth, occultism, magic, witchcraft, all that stuff. It's still going to be on this channel. And then all the other technology, business, financial, growth, marketing tactics, all AI, all that other stuff, that's going to be on the other channel. It's called Hack the Hologram. And you're welcome to follow me on both, but you'll see the merger of the two. Anyway, I hope you learned something from this. And in that closing note, what I want to say is, I've made you aware of my belief And there's the belief that we are entering a new stage of life, and that the current hierarchies that we're going to see that are in these extreme dualities of left and right and good and bad, that is going to come crashing down. And new paradigms need to now be established. And it's going to be up to the young, that's going to be up to the open minded and the spiritual that are able to heal this rift between their sensuality, their heart, and their mind, that can open up to narratives that are safety driven, that soothe the nervous system, but also recognizes the sovereignty of the soul, instead of looking outside for things that's going to guide the unfoldment of it. You are one of those people. That's why you're here. That's why you were brought to this video. That's why you've participated to this point. Inside of you is a magical book, a magical text, and it's written in your heart, and there may be a lot of pain there. And I feel for you. I feel that pain for you because I know it wasn't always your fault. And I know you tried your best every single step of the way. And I'm sorry they hurt you. And I'm sorry they betrayed you. And I'm sorry they couldn't see you. But what if it was because you weren't willing to fully see yourself? Because you were actually still playing small. And I want you to join me on this journey, but I want you, more than joining me, I want you to join with the divine within yourself, within your own soul. And I want you to start the adventure of actually, truly, and completely not only loving yourself, but believing yourself and seeing your fullest potential, because it's far greater and far more beautiful than anyone has ever dared say. And I'm saying it. I love you. I don't know you yet, but you're here to do important things. And remember to live deliciously.